An international commission is meeting this week to talk about the issue of the drug war and to come up with possible alternatives. And I want to give you some of the quotes from the gathering. So first of all, what are they going to argue for? Is it reduced sentences, for example? So that's one idea that's been floating around out there. Or the idea of smarter criminal punishments, maybe not something we do in the U.S. with mandatory minimums and, treating people very harsh for relatively minor crimes, nonviolent crimes. Well, no, that's actually not what they're discussing. They're not discussing getting rid of mandatory minimums or lessening punishment. So is it decriminalization, right? If we're talking about a drug summit, I mean, that's got to be on the table, decriminalization. So we make it like it's not legal, but you don't go to jail. That's not what they're discussing either. So what is it? What is it? Quote, the continued expansion of the illicit trade, despite growing enforcement efforts aimed at curtailing it, demonstrates the futility of repressive prohibitions. See where they're going with this? Therefore, in the longer term, drug markets should be responsibly regulated by government authorities. Without legal regulation, control, and enforcement, the drug trade will remain in the hands of organized criminals. Ultimately, this is a choice between control in the hands of governments or gangsters. There is no third option in which drug markets can be made to disappear. So, in case you didn't get the direct message that was trying to get through there in that word salad, they're calling for legalization. Now, to be clear, they have various forms of legalization that they talk about, okay? So it's not like the kind of legalization that I would be in favor of, where you treat all these drugs like they're alcohol or tobacco. No, they have different variations. So, for example, certain harder drugs like crack or heroin, they would be under stricter government control, okay? And I'm sure there would be needle systems in place where it's administered in a safe way so that it cuts down the spread of different diseases and whatnot. They say, quote, in the drug war, the parameters of success are measures like acres of illicit crops eradicated, numbers of arrests and prosecutions, and amount of drugs seized. But they haven't reached the goal of a safer society. Even the most lofty of drug war outcomes, like capturing major cartel leaders, have adverse consequences by simply creating a power void that begets more violence. Instead, we should measure by number of fatal overdoses, rate of HIV and AIDS transmission via needles, rate of violent crime, and the power of criminal organizations. So, they're laying it out there for you. They're saying, okay, for all of the reasons why alcohol prohibition in the U.S. was a dumb fucking idea and it was a massive failure, the same is true of marijuana prohibition. The same is true of cocaine prohibition. Just drug prohibition in general. What you've done is you've strengthened the cartels. You've strengthened the cartels. You've increased crime. You've created all these horrendous problems. And the only way to get rid of the problems is to legalize it and regulate it. If you take away the monopoly that the cartels have on the drug trade, well, then they're not going to be nearly as powerful. And they're saying that the barometers we use for success right now, it's like, well, how many bad guys did we kill and how many different drug crops did we destroy? But they don't look at the bigger numbers. Like, for example, there are more people using drugs now than there were when we started the war on drugs. $1 trillion later, over $1 trillion later, we have nothing to show for it. So they're saying your measure of success makes absolutely no sense. You could destroy crops all you want. You could arrest bad people all you want. More bad people are going to fill their places, and still more people are taking the drugs, so you're never going to get all the crops. So they're saying, why don't we change the definition of success to mean, oh, I don't know, you cut the number of fatal overdose rates, you cut down on HIV and AIDS transmission, you get rid of violent crime, and you weaken the cartels and the criminal organizations. And that is a measure of success that makes sense. So they're right. But now, here's the really, really interesting part. a lot of people, as they're hearing this, they're probably going, well, what kind of an international commission was this? What kind of people were at this event? You know, who are we talking about here? Are these like uber liberal do-gooders who are going to go from this event to a fucking Code Pink meeting or a new Black Panthers meeting? What's happening here? They're not going to argue for legalization if it's like a serious event, right? Wrong. Quote, 8 former heads of state and other world leaders showed up. So, I'll give you some specifics. Former President of Brazil, Fernando Henrique, pardon my ignorance, Cardoso. Former President of Colombia, Cesar Gaviria. Former President of Poland, Alexander Kwasniewski, no relation. Former Chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker. Former U.S. Secretary of State, John Whitehead. These are all people that showed up, just to name a few. Okay? The movement is growing. People are opening their eyes and they're realizing the war on drugs has been a tremendous failure. The outlawing of drugs has been a tremendous failure. And we need to move in the other direction. The only things that are blocking us, the DEA and other anti-drug government organizations, because they make all their money because drugs are illegal. So, of course, they're going to fight to keep their jobs, and they're going to fight to keep drugs to be illegal. And pharmaceutical companies and other drug companies, alcohol companies, tobacco companies, and pharmaceutical companies. I mean, these are all of the lobbies that view legalization of marijuana and other substances as competition. So they want to crush their competition. They don't want to have competition. They want to make as much money as possible. So you pay politicians to keep the drug war going. You lobby in that direction, and then you get what you want, and you end up making more money. So we have to defeat these lobbies in order to get the smart policy in place. And the good news is that it's becoming common understanding that the drug war has failed, and we need to stop with the prohibition on drugs. So hopefully at some point that feeling will override the strength of the lobbies today.